Let's talk about the best smut I read in 2021. We all know I love smut here on this channel, and I like to relegate it to separate videos because not everyone is interested in reading smut. I realize that, and so I feel like if you're interested in it, you have these videos. If not, you can just skip them. I just believe they deserve their own category. I'm also gonna have a worst smut of the year list because I read so much bad smut last year. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm doing my series where I dive into different subgenres of smut that maybe aren't for me. I guess I'm just coming across more smut that I don't like than I usually would when I pick up smut that I know is like in my genre. But regardless, we're here to talk about the best smut I read this year. Starting at number 7. I didn't have quite enough for a top 10 list, which is really quite sad. Clearly I need to be making better choices this year. Number 7 is Asking For It by Lilah Pace. A subscriber is actually the one who recommended this to me, so thank you for that because I really enjoyed this. This was about two people who basically come across each other at a party and find out that they're both interested in the same type of roleplay. And that is basically non-consensual sex. The idea of role-playing a rape fantasy can be very taboo for most people for obvious reasons, because nobody ever wants to make sexual assault seem appropriate, because it's obviously fucking not. I feel like this book did a good job at handling that conversation well, of saying no girl wants to actually be raped. Obviously. The reason this is hot is because it's a fantasy, because this is not real. Because she still has control over whether it ends or whether they keep going. It talks about the idea that you can want to explore darker things in your sexual life without being a terrible person. Now, one of the things that I have mixed feelings on is the fact that both of these people in the story have sexual assault in their past. I wish that it had just been one of them, but regardless, it's a thing that happens. I feel like the writer does a really good job of dealing with it with the main character. I think that the sexual assault scene from the main character's past is handled so well because it's written so differently from the actual roleplay sex scenes. The roleplay and sex scenes, these same type of scenes, are shown to be erotic and hot and sexy because she's into it. Whereas the scene in which she's sexually assaulted, the author writes about it in a completely different way and it feels traumatic. It is not eroticized and it is very clearly horrific. Now, the love interest traumatic past I don't love as much because it's really tacked on to the end. It feels like it's there for shock factor. But the rest of the book I love so much that I don't want to like harp on just that fact because I really did love the conversations that were explored in this book. I love some of the sex scenes and I just really enjoy when we try to normalize different fetishes, different experiences. When we take this shit out of the dark and say like, hey, lots of people have these fantasies. And that's alright. And there is a difference between consenting to a very rough scene and rape. Like, it seems like such basic shit, but I feel like it's something that is still very taboo. And so I always appreciate when a book can show just why it doesn't have to be. The next book on this list at number 6 is Kill Switch by Penelope Douglas. Now, I know I rail against Penelope Douglas all the time here on this channel. She is not my favorite author, but I understand why people love this book now. This is her third book in the Devil's Night series. This is a series about a group of friends who all do crazy ass shenanigans on Devil's Night. Eventually they get in trouble, they go to jail, and basically this series follows each of those members and their love interest. This book is about Damon, who is very much like the darkest, worst, psychopathic member of the group, and his love interest, I want to say Emmy, but that might be the fourth love interest. Willow. After reading this book, I was actually going to finish off the series. I tried. I already DNF'd the fourth book. I'm just not going to do it to myself. I'm considering this third book a win and just accepting that I don't care about the rest of the series. Penelope Douglas did such a good job at writing this main character's point of view, Willow. I feel like she is probably the most well-rounded character that I've read from Penelope Douglas. And I've read like 7 or 8 books of hers. And I felt like she was a whole person that I knew. Which is sometimes really rare in smut novels. Basically, this book follows along as It flips back and forth between the past and present, as all her books do. When she first kind of meets Damon, and honestly, there's such a lot of backstory to this story because Damon accidentally blinds her, sort of, when they're children. They both end up at the same high school. Damon's not allowed near her, but then he decides to basically pretend to be someone else while she falls in love with him. And then, of course, we go to the present after he gets out of jail and he decides to marry her sister in order to be around her more and control her life until he can make her forgive him. It's a lot of plot in order just to get these two in the same house and near each other. And normally that would drive me crazy. And honestly, some of the plot dynamics did drive me crazy, but the characters themselves had such an interesting dynamic that really shone above everything else. Now, obviously, I am not blind, so I can't speak to the representation, but it felt, for once, like seeing this disability representation, it didn't feel like trauma porn, it didn't feel like inspiration porn. It literally just felt like this was a part of who she was, but it wasn't all of who she was. Yes, some moments were hard, and yes, she was a fighter, but she wasn't just a fighter because of her disability, she was just a fighter in general. That's just who she was as a person. And that's like one of the biggest reasons why her and Damon work so well in this book, is because she didn't let him get away with anything. She was ready to always fight back, which was very nice to see because a lot of times in these bully romances, the girl lets the guy get away with way too much, and she really doesn't at any point in this novel. I also continue to love the scenes between Damon and Will. They have such an interesting push and pull, and honestly, I just want to see more of that, but not enough to read the fourth book because 800 pages is way too long for any smutty novel, let alone one about characters I don't care about and from an author I don't always like. Number 5 is Dreams of 18 by Saffron A. Kent. Saffron A. Kent is an author I've really started to like. She does a lot of age gap relationships, which really aren't necessarily my forte, but she's so good at writing them that, like, it's really starting to win me over. Dreams of 18 is about a girl who decides to kiss her much older neighbor the day that she turns 18. He gets driven out of town because he's actually a teacher and a soccer coach? I can't remember specifically. But basically, it becomes a huge scandal. He gets driven out of town. And years later, once she gets out of this psychiatric unit, she decides to track him down and apologize for all the havoc she's brought into his life. But when she finds him, she finds that his life is really in need of repair, and she feels so bad that she's the one who caused all this that she decides to stay there and try to fix him, basically. There's a lot of ways that this might not have worked, but Saffron A. Kent really does well, in my opinion, at writing main characters especially ones that deal with mental health issues. This has been a thorough line kind of in all the books I've read from her. I think I appreciate the way she does it because while these characters all fall in love despite their mental health issues, their love interests never fix their mental health issues. And I think that's really important because so often we see stories where they fall in love and all of a sudden it's happily ever after and any problem they've ever had is now gone. And I'm like, that's not how any sort of mental health issue works. Like, you can't cure your depression by falling in love. That's not it. And so I really appreciate that that's never the answer in her stories. Saffron A. Kent is also the queen of dirty talk. It can be quite explicit. Sometimes I'm not quite sold on her word choices, but I still appreciate some good dirty talk. So I definitely really like that. She often goes for the grumpy love interest trope, and I'm a big fan of that. I quite enjoy, like, this guy who's kind of an asshole who, like, pushes her away, but she, like, forces herself into his life. Like, I enjoy that. And sometimes it can go a bit over the line for a lot of people, I think. In The Unrequited, the guy is a true fucking asshole, whereas in this book, I actually feel like he's not that bad. He's not that big of a dick. You totally understand where he's coming from because this could still be seen as super inappropriate. And you can also understand why she would want to make it up to him. Like, both sides of this equation actually make sense for once, and I very much appreciate that. I honestly can't wait to read more from Saffron A. Kent. She is definitely an author that I want to read her entire backlist because there's just so much to love there. Number 4 is Lilac by BB Reid. Now this one was quite a journey. I love BB Reid. I have read many books from her in the past. Fear Me is one of my favorite smut novels ever. And so I was really excited to pick this up. Now what I will say is I wish this was a series so bad because I love it so much and I feel like I would love it all the more if it was the series because there was a lot crammed into this 600-page novel. Now this is a reverse harem musician romance. Basically it's about this band called Bound. Their lead singer leaves and they have to replace them. In comes, I want to say her name's Fallon. Did I remember that? Holy shit. I read this forever ago, so clearly it made a mark on me if I can remember some characters' names. So in walks Fallon, who these band members do not want there, but she's been hired by the record company that produces their music, so she's there to stay. And so starts this bully romance with 3 different love interests who I all love. Well, that's not true. I love 2 of them a lot, and then there's just like this other one I don't care about. There is so much drama packed into this 600-page book, and that's why I feel like it would be better off as a series because it is often very messy and very, very confusing at times because you can never tell quite why the characters are acting the way they're acting other than they're just like petulant children. But I love each of these characters. I think they're so interesting. I love their dynamics. Not only is there the dynamic between Fallon and each of these guys, but there's also the dynamic between 2 of the guys in the band because they have a past as well, Jericho and, okay, so Lauren. Ha! I actually remembered it. Holy shit. Okay, Jericho and Lauren have also had some history there, so I really love their dynamic. I think they had the best chemistry out of anyone, and I would have loved to see like a little standalone story about their past, like a prequel. That would be so great. Just saying. BB Reid. Rockstar romances aren't necessarily my thing, but because of how much I loved this novel, I actually think I'd be more inclined to pick them up because this one was such a winner for me. If you want something that's just like super fast-paced, can't put down, hot sex scenes, and kind of almost like a fan fiction vibe, but where it's just like salacious, a little unrealistic and unbelievable, but so much fun, then I definitely think this is a great one to pick up. Number 3 on my list is Lotto Men by Ann Denton. Now this is one I wasn't fully expecting to love, and yet I was completely blown away by it by the end. This is about our main character who gets hired by her best friend after her best friend wins the lottery, and she wants her to basically run a game show on this random island, invite a ton of different men over, and find her a harem. The main character takes her up on this because she wants to start her own like catering company and party planning business, and she figures this will be a good way to get it off the ground. Little does she know she's gonna end up with a harem of her own by the end of the book. Now this very much is a romantic comedy, and I'm not a romantic comedy girl. I find the comedy aspects can be a bit grating, and they definitely were when I first started this novel. I wasn't into it at first. I just like couldn't wrap my head around the weird tone this had because I haven't read a lot of things like this. But by the time I met the men in the stories, I was just like falling head over heels. Not only are they different and unique from each other, but they're also different and unique from any love interest I feel like I've ever read. I definitely don't remember any of the characters' names. Let's face it, Lilac was a total outlier, but basically we have dudes A, B, and C. Dude A is a compulsive liar, which was just so interesting and funny. Like, he definitely brought a lot of the comedic relief, and he's like this like overgrown man-child, but just I found him so charming, and the dynamic between him and the main character just like very interesting and different, like I said. Dude B is kind of your gruff, grumpy, stoic airline pilot, I believe. Now he was the only one I would say is like not the most interesting of the guys. He's a bit more of the trope you would usually see. And then dude C is a chef who does some very interesting naughty things with food, and those scenes were hot and different and just like not at all what I was expecting. Like, you know when you read a book and you're like, oh, I'm not into that thing, and then all of a sudden you're like, or am I? Maybe I am. Maybe things are changing. That's all I'm saying. This author is so good at writing sex scenes that she's making me discover new fetishes. Every moment of this book was a pure delight, and I'm going to pick up so many more things by Ann Denton because like I just have to see what else she's written. Now, number 2 is American Queen by Simone. Now this book is about the President of the United States, his wife, and his vice president, and all 3 of them are kind of in love with each other. Simone is the queen of writing these like menage romances where they're just like all three a triad who just like adores each other. She did it in the Thorn Chapel series, and here she is doing it again. Now, as a threesome, these three I think are even more interesting than the three in the Thorn Chapel series. I love those books more than the American Queen stories because while I do love their dynamic, I think that the American Queen stories are kind of a mess. The plot, I can't even get into it. Everyone is so connected to everyone else, and there's too much going on at all times. But the characters are so great. I love their dynamics. What I will say is there's a lot of flashbacks, there's a lot of backstory that I don't particularly care about. I do love the backstory between the two men, the vice president and the president. I think they have a really interesting backstory. They were both soldiers and they went to war together, and so they have a lot of backstory that takes place then, and it is lovely. But the actual backstory with Greer, the main character, I don't care about it as much. But in the present times, there are some hot fucking sex scenes, y'all. Especially, I love our president of the United States. Like, if this was a guy up for election, I would move to the US just to vote for him because, like, the daddy dom energy he's giving, like, moment of silence, because it is so good. It is so hot. I am so into it. I feel like Sierra Simone just gets me and my personal fetishes and kinks, and like this book just proves it. Aside from the incest that comes in book 2, because please, Sierra Simone, stop putting secret incest in your books. It is so unnecessary and gross. I didn't like the sequel at all. Like, it was not for me, but this first book, it is just chef's kiss, like truly beautiful. Now, let's talk about my #1 smut book of the year. I feel like it is going to come to absolutely no one's surprise. That is The King by Tiffany Riesz. I love Tiffany Riesz with my whole fucking chest, with my whole fucking heart. Like, she could absolutely own me because I just am so impressed with every single book I pick up from her. Now, this is my favorite series of all time, the original Sinner series. And honestly, after the first 4 books, I kind of assumed that I wasn't going to love the next books nearly as much, because the first 4 books are the present day storyline, whereas the next 4 books are basically prequels to the first 4 books. It's very confusing, but it's basically the backstories of these characters. And The King was about Kingsley Edge, who is quite possibly my favorite character. It's hard to say. I love them all so much. Like, I feel like saying anyone's my favorite character is like blasphemy. He's basically the king of the underworld. He runs these very exclusive, very prolific sex clubs in New York. And in this story, we get to see how that all came to be, how he became the king of the underground. A lot of this focused on him and his right-hand woman that he meets in this book, and she just becomes like his confidant. She becomes the woman he goes to help like solve all of his problems, to help run all these underground bacchanalias, I feel like you can probably see a theme throughout this video, and that is that characters' dynamics are the most important thing to me. And once again, Tiffany Riesz just kills it. That's what she excels at, and this book was no different. The dynamic between Kingsley Edge and his right-hand woman was just so interesting. She's a lesbian, and despite that, they are somewhat attracted to each other. Let me just tell you right now, they never have sex. That's not where this is going, and I love that Tiffany Riesz respects this character's sexual identity enough to say, like, we're not gonna cross that line, while also exploring the fact that sexuality is complicated and you can be attracted to other people despite your sexual orientation. Like, it's not as black and white as we all want to make it seem. You're the one who gets to label yourself and define your own sexuality while also realizing that your emotions can play tricks on you. You know, there's still that taboo nature of like, are they gonna cross that line? How close are they going to get to it? She just respects the character's emotions. And you know, she also just does the work. She shows why these characters trust each other so much, why these characters have grown this relationship that they have. I just loved seeing this bond build. I just think it was done so well. It was so touching and heartfelt, while also having some moments of titillation. Those are my 7 best smut books of 2021. Leave me some recommendations down below if you've read anything super hot, because clearly I need some better smut books, because I'm pretty sure I have more books on my worst smut list than my best, and that's not great. I hope you liked this video, and I hope we come back in soon. Bye.